week 3 of the fantasy football season. Here's running back start sits every matchup this week. Thursday Night Football, New England Patriots at the New York Jets. Ramondre Stevenson, so far in the early going, he's been playing great football for this New England Patriot team. 2 weeks in a row with big ball games, and this week, even in a tough matchup on paper at the New York Jets, I would give him a start. We saw week 1 Jordan Mason go off for a big game versus Jet defense, and we saw last week Tony Pollard go out there and have a good game. So Ramondre Stevenson, I would have some confidence in starting him this week. Antonio Gibson coming off a good game, but he's still only going to be the backup and getting 7 to 10 touches per game for this New England Patriot team, and not enough unless you're in the deepest of leagues to start. He's a sit. Breece Hall, he's locked in each and every week, matchup proof, one of the better backs in fantasy football. He's a start. And Braylon Allen, he was a hot waiver wire pickup this week, no doubt about it. And he got decent workloads in that game and found the end zone twice in the victory at the Tennessee Titans. But for now, I'm going to sit. If we see another week or two with a good workload for Braylon Allen, then he'll be in that flex conversation. Denver Broncos at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Javonte Williams, he looked good in week 2 in a bounce-back performance versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. But this week in a matchup where they're going to be trailing early and often is this Denver Bronco team. Going into Tampa Bay, I don't see Javonte Williams, the way the game script's going to go, have much fantasy value. And as a flex option, I still think he could go out there and give you 10, 12 fantasy points in PPR. But like I said, his ceiling isn't great, and the way the game script will go, he's not going to be in on a lot of passing downs. Jaleel McLaughlin so far this season is the backup running back, beating Samaje Perine out for the job after he got cut loose and went to Kansas City. He really hasn't done much in the early going, and he's even a player that's on the cut list. So this week in a tough matchup, and with no results so far in the early going, he's a sit. Rachaad White coming off a ball game where he didn't do much, but Rachaad White, we know, is one of the better PPR running backs in the league. So this week in a better matchup, I think he bounces back, and he's a start. Irvin, one of the better handcuffs in all fantasy football, but the touches went down for him in week 2. And this week I could see it going up if they want to run the clock down and run the football more, but he's a sit. Houston Texans at the Minnesota Vikings. Joe Mixon got banged up in the middle of that ball game, hurting the ankle versus Chicago Bears on Sunday Night Football. But if Mixon's good to go, he's a start. And if he's not good to go, Damian Pierce and Cam Akers, if Pierce comes back from his own ankle injury, will be most likely rotating in a 50-50 split, but I wouldn't have much interest in starting those guys. You definitely roster those guys if Joe Mixon's out, but starting them in a matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings, that have been a surprising defense so far in the early going. They're both sits. Aaron Jones, a flex option at best for me. We saw Ty Chandler eat into the workload in week 2's victory versus San Francisco 49ers. And also Aaron Jones, he's not healthy enough anymore where he could last the full season, getting a full workload. So Ty Chandler got 10 touches in the week 2 ball game. Aaron Jones, 13 touches in that one. He wasn't as efficient as Ty Chandler. And this week in a matchup versus a tough defense that just shut down DeAndre Swift, and in week 1, Jonathan Taylor didn't do much damage. He's a flex option at best. Ty Chandler, a sit. I know he had 10 carries, 82 yards, and he's one of the better handcuff running backs in all pro football and fantasy football is Ty Chandler. But if he ever gets more of a workload or it's a 50-50 split, then he would be a start pretty much each and every week, or a flex option worse. But this week, he's a sit. Los Angeles Chargers at the Pittsburgh Steelers. J.K. Dobbins, first 2 games of the year, over 130 yards for Dobbins. And this is a tough matchup, no doubt about it, at the Pittsburgh Steelers. One of the better run defenses in the league and one of the better defenses overall in the league. But J.K. Dobbins, a player coming off 230-plus yard rushing performances. You don't have him sit on the bench. So this week, he's starting. Gus Edwards is sit. I know he had a decent ball game in week 2 with Gus Edwards, but if he's not scoring a touchdown, obviously he's not going to have enough fantasy points to make noise as Gus Edwards. Last season, what a year it was for him in Baltimore, a lot of goal line stampers, but this year it looks like J.K. Dobbins is the man over there. Even though Gus Edwards is still getting a healthy workload, he's not finding the end zone. So this week in a tough matchup, I would sit him even if he finds the end zone. His ceiling isn't that high to the Steelers. Najee Harris, he's been all right so far in the early going. He's definitely outtouched Jalen Warren the first 2 weeks of the season, but this is a tougher matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers, where I think this Charger team, it's a new regime there with Harbaugh under the helm, and things are different, and they're playing good football in the early going. So if the Chargers could get off to an early start, I think the Steelers are going to have to abandon the run, and that's where Jalen Warren could come in to play and be the receiving back. So at best, Najee Harris is a flex option. Jaylen Warren, I'm sitting in this one. Week 2, definitely a better game for him than in Week 1 for Jaylen Warren. Obviously, more touches, and he showed some of that receiving prowess out of the backfield. But still, I don't believe his ceiling is that high with Justin Fields being a running quarterback and Najee Harris being over there. So Jaylen Warren this week in a tougher matchup versus a good defense is a sit. Philadelphia Eagles at the New Orleans Saints. Not much to say in this one. These guys are locked in your lineup each and every week. Saquon Barkley, monster week 1. Workhorse over there in Philly. Fits the offense like a glove, even in a tougher matchup versus a good defense. He's matchup proof. He's a start. Alvin Kamara, so far the best running back in fantasy football. 5 touchdowns the first 2 games, coming off of 4 touchdowns last week at the Dallas Cowboys. And he's turning back the clock, and he's explosive, and he's making big plays. So this week in a matchup, like I said, Kamara's a top 5, top 10 running back weekly. And a start, Green Bay Packers at the Tennessee Titans. Josh Jacobs a start, coming off a monster workload. 32 carries, over 150 yards for him in the victory versus the Indianapolis Colts. And now they go to Tennessee, where I know they're a pretty solid defense. But with that workload and with Jordan Love most likely out once again this week, Josh Jacobs is a lock in the lineups. Tony Pollard, first 2 weeks of the season, he's run way better than he did in the beginning and even the end of last season with his new team in the Tennessee Titans. So Pollard versus tougher defenses, he's gone out there and ran the football well versus stout Bears defense. He ran well in week 1. And last week versus the New York Jets, he went out there and had a solid performance. So this week versus the Packers, a middle of the pack running defense. Even though Taylor went over 100 yards last week, Pollard's a start. New York Giants at the Cleveland Browns. Devin Singletary, mixed bag of results so far in the early going. But this week, I don't like the matchup. This Cleveland Brown defense, I think, is one of the better units in the league. Week 1, the Cowboy running game didn't do much versus them. I know week 2, ETN got off a little bit in that one. But this Cleveland Brown defense, the game plan is going to be stop the run and let Daniel Jones try to beat us. So this week, I don't think Devin Singletary will do what he did last week, where he had 14.20 fantasy points. He's a sit. Now to the Browns, Jerome Ford, a flex option at best. It's a good matchup on paper, no doubt about it, versus the New York Giants, one of the worst defenses in the league. And we saw week 1, Aaron Jones have a nice game. And week 2, Brian Robinson broke out with a monster performance, over 130 yards. And we saw Austin Eckler have double-digit fantasy points. So Jerome Ford, I think, fits the bill. And this one is a flex option. And Deonta Foreman, he started the game and had 14 carries in week 2 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. But he didn't do much, and it's tough to trust Foreman even in a decent matchup versus the Giants. He's a sit. Chicago Bears at the Indianapolis Colts. So far, DeAndre Swift, he hasn't done much for the Chicago Bear team. His yards per carry have been non-existent. Like I said, we saw Josh Jacobs go out there, have a big workload, have a big ball game. And in week 1 as well, we saw Joe Mixon carve this run defense up. So I'm going to give DeAndre Swift one more chance to at least be a flex option this week. Jonathan Taylor, he's the bell cow. No one else pretty much getting carries in the backfield. Going over 100 yards last week in the loss of Green Bay. And he's locked in starting lineups as a start. Miami Dolphins at the Seattle Seahawks. Devon Achane, so far first 2 weeks of the season, top 5 running back easily in the league. And this week, even if Raheem Mostert returns to the lineup, Devon Achane could do it all. Catch the football out of the backfield, one of the better receiving backs in the league. In between the tackles, we saw him get over 20 touches in week 2 in the loss. And now if Tua is going to be out multiple weeks, Achane's going to be fed even more. And a lot of screen passes I think he's going to get in this one and for the next few weeks from Skylar Thompson. He's a must-start. Raheem Mostert, Jalen Wright, Jeff Wilson, just not enough upside. And like I said, Achane showing he could carry a full workload in week 2. So all those running backs are sit options. And Zach Charbonnet, I'm just going to think Kenneth Walker's out again because that oblique injury, very tricky. And that affects your whole body, especially as a running back and taking a lot of contacts. So Charbonnet, I think, gets the call again. And we saw he had a solid ball game in week 2 at the Patriots. So he will be a start for me. Carolina Panthers at the Vegas Raiders. Not much going on this one. I know Chuba Hubbard at 10 carries, 64 yards, good yards per carry, obviously, in week 2 in the loss versus the Los Angeles Chargers. But if the game script gets out of hand once again, even though Andy Dalton, the starting quarterback now, I think this team actually can move the football down the field a little bit more. With Bryce Young, he just doesn't look like he's an NFL quarterback. But anyway, Chuba Hubbard in this matchup's a sit. Zamir White, we haven't seen much at all out of him. Alexander Madison, Week 1 had a touchdown, Week 2 didn't do much, and it's tough to trust anyone in this Raider backfield, even in a plus matchup versus the Panthers. They're both sits to me. Baltimore Ravens at the Dallas Cowboys. Derrick Henry, the first couple weeks, he hasn't looked all that great. Last week, he put up a solid performance, 16.60 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And this week versus Cowboy run defense that just got torched for 4 touchdowns by Alvin Kamara. Derrick Henry gets the nod. Justice Hill in deeper leagues. Maybe you want to put him in there in PPR leagues, 15, 16-team league or deeper. But if this ball game's close, the game script's not going to be in the favor of Justice Hill like it was in Week 1. So he's a sit. Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dotto, pretty much a 50-50 split over there for this Cowboy team. But this week, a tough matchup versus run defense. That shut down the Vegas Raider run game. So in Week 1, Pacheco had some tough times as well. Both these running backs had one part of them in this one. San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. Jordan Mason, he's a locked-in top 12, 15 option every week with McCaffrey out 4 to 6 weeks more on injured reserve. And he's in a high-powered offense where those boxes aren't going to be as loaded. And Mason, he's a physical runner, and he showed he could carry a full workload the first 2 weeks. Kyren Williams, he's locked in as an every-week starter as well. And I think the workload's going to go up even more now with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp both out multiple weeks minimum for this Ram team, where they want to be a run-first type of team and try to keep these ball games close, where Matthew Stafford's working with a lot of young receivers now this season with those 2 injuries. Detroit Lions at the Arizona Cardinals. Jahmyr Gibbs, he's an every week start. He was a first, early second-round pick in fantasy drafts, one of the more versatile backs in all pro football and fantasy football, so he's getting the starting nod. And David Montgomery's a solid number 2 running back for fantasy owners, and this is one of the best, if not the best backfield, in my opinion, in all pro football for this Detroit Lion team, where both these players get their own series. They go out there, they make plays for this offense, and this is a high-powered offense, obviously. And this week, in a decent matchup at the Arizona Cardinals, I think they both go out there and have good performances. James Conner, first 2 weeks of the season, I think he's playing over his head a little bit, but this is a high-powered offense over there for this Arizona Cardinal team. And James Conner's putting up top 5, top 10 numbers the first 2 weeks of the season, and he's locked in as a starter. Sunday Night Football, Kansas City Chiefs at the Atlanta Falcons. Now Isaiah Pacheco out with the leg injury 6 to 8 weeks. And now Kareem Hunt's coming in for a visit. Most likely, I believe he's going to sign. And it wouldn't be surprising to me as well if Jerick McKinnon signs as well with this Kansas City Chief team in the next couple weeks or even next few days. With Carson Steele and Samaje Perine, even if those guys come in, they're not game ready and they got to get up to snuff, even though they've been in this Chief system with Andy Reid throughout the years. But Carson Steele, top waiver wire pickup, no doubt about it. Samaje Perine, one of the top pickups as well, where I think Steele's going to be the early downs back and goal line with Perine coming in the passing downs back and some in between the tackle work. But I have to see what this backfield could produce and who else they bring in. So this week I'm going to play it, wait and see approach and sit both these running backs. And now to Atlanta, Bijan, he was a top 5, top 6 pick in most fantasy drafts. He's a start. He's matchup proof, one of the best backs already in fantasy football. And Tyler Algier, he's a sit for me. Obviously, if something ever happened to Bijan with a big injury or something, then Tyler Algier, he's a top 15, 18 running back. But this week a sit. And Monday Night Football, the first of 2 games, Jacksonville Jaguars at the Buffalo Bills. Both these running backs are locked in his starts each and every week. ETN last week looked good, had a bounce-back performance. Tank Bigsby got banged up, might be ready for week 3 and not miss that ball game. But Travis Etienne's pretty much the only back here with most value, catching the football out of the backfield and doing in between the tackles. And James Cook, he's been a stud running back since the end of last season. They brought it into this season coming off a 3-touchdown game, and he's a must-start. And the last game on the doubleheader on Monday night, Washington Commanders at the Cincinnati Bengals. Brian Robinson, the first 2 weeks of the season, has been one of the better running backs in fantasy football. And this week in a pretty good matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals, where they've got carved up the first 2 weeks on the ground by Stevenson in week 1. And then last week, Pacheco having a big game before he went out with injury. Robinson is a start running back, a top 12 option, 15 option weekly, it looks like. And Austin Eckler, first 2 weeks of the year, he's been solid in PPR with double-digit fantasy games in both games. And this week, he's a flex option for me. We know he could catch the football out of the backfield. We're not going to see a lot of in-between-the-tackle work anymore for Austin Eckler, but I think he's a good backup and a mix-in type of running back with Brian Robinson. And now to Cincinnati, Zach Moss is a flex option. It looks like he's going to be the main man in this backfield, with Chase Brown had only 20% of the touches and the snaps in week 2. So Zach Moss is a starting running back. And so far, he's been all right, I think, Zach Moss. But this run defense, I think, could give Zach Moss a little trouble in this one. And he's a flex option. And Chase Brown, like I said, he hasn't done much in the first 2 weeks. And how could you have any confidence in him to do anything? He's a sit. So that's running back start sits every matchup for week 3 of the fantasy football season.